everybody's saying, oh, diversity matters. Well, actually, unity matters way more than diversity. Hey, how you doing? Christopher Harris with Unhyphenated America, and we're always here to promote the idea that America's best when it's unhyphenated. And usually we end up having to say something to fight against identity politics, the things that are destroying this country. And today is no different. Today we're going to talk about two things: sports and business, where America's being destroyed from within. The number one thing we're going to talk about is football. Right? I mean, what do you think of when you think of football? You think of like big, burly, masculine men playing football, right? And that's what most people think of. And even those positions that are like we call skill positions, like a kicker, right? You might not necessarily think of somebody being like the biggest, strongest, fastest man out there on the field, but usually they're a fairly athletic man. But in this case, today we're going to talk about a kicker for a major college football team who's a woman. That woman is Sarah Fuller, who was the kicker this past weekend for Vanderbilt University. And here's the most fascinating thing. Sarah Fuller won the Conference Special Teams Player of the Week for the SEC, which is a Southeastern Conference. That's what's known as a Power 5 conference. So Sarah also had the distinction of being the first female to play for a Power 5 college football conference, right? But here's what's fascinating. Listen, I'm going to give you some numbers, run down some stats, right? Because to me, it's all about performance. You have to perform when you're on the field. And you know what? You should get credit for your performance. So let's run down some numbers. Let's talk about some of the other games that happened that same weekend in the SEC. You had, and some of the other players, let's compare apples to apples, right? So let's talk about the football game that took place between the University of Kentucky and the University of Florida. There was a kicker, Mark Ruffalo for Kentucky, who kicked one field goal and scored 3 points. That same game, Evan McPherson, who was the kicker for Florida, kicked 2 field goals and 4 extra points and scored 10 points. Another SEC game that same weekend, Anders Carlson, the kicker for Auburn University. He kicked 2 field goals, 1 extra point, and scored 7 points. During that same game, his opponent, Will Reichard from the University of Alabama, kicked 6 extra points and scored 6 total points. Let's look at another SEC game. You got Cade York from LSU, Louisiana State University. He kicked 1 extra point and scored 1 point. During that game, his opponent was Seth Small from Texas A&M University. He kicked 2 field goals and kicked 2 extra points and scored a total of 6 points. Another SEC game that same weekend, Brandon Ruiz from Mississippi State University kicked 1 field goal and kicked 3 extra points and scored 6 points. His opponent, Luke Logan from Mississippi University, kicked 1 field goal, 4 extra points, and scored 7 points. Another SEC game, Jack Podlesny, if I'm butchering his name, I don't know, from Georgia, University of Georgia. He kicked 1 field goal, kicked 6 extra points, and scored 9 points. His opponent in that game was Parker White, the kicker from South Carolina University, University of South Carolina. He kicked 1 field goal, 1 extra point, and scored 4 points. Now, let's go to the game where Sarah Fuller played. Sarah Fuller kicked 0 field goals and 0 extra points and scored 0 points. During that same game, her opponent, Harrison Mevis from Missouri University, Mizzou as they call it, he kicked 2 field goals, 5 extra points, and scored 11 points. But here's the thing, Sarah Fuller only kicked the ball 1 time. She did a kickoff in the second half, and it was what they call a squib kick, right? So she didn't kick in the first half, she kicked in the second half. She did a squib kick that went a just booming 30 yards. 30-yard kick. One kick, it went 30 yards, It went bloop, 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 right down the field. It wasn't like a big booming kick that went high up in the air. And you know, you're used to seeing this in football, right? You got the receiving guy back there. He's looking up in the sky, trying to block the sun out of his eyes to catch the ball so he can catch it and get running before they crush him. That didn't happen. Because when that ball came off the tee, when Sarah Fuller kicked the ball, they all went bloop, 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 rolled down the field, right? And somebody else scooped it up. And for that rousing, fantastic performance where she only kicked the ball off the tee one time, and she kicked 0 field goals and kicked 0 extra points, Sarah Fuller was the SEC Special Teams Player of the Week. She's the only kicker in the whole Southeastern Conference who didn't score a single point. Not a single point. She didn't even attempt a field goal, didn't even attempt an extra point, let alone actually score a field goal or score an extra point. She cooked 0. She just made 1 kick, the opening kick of the second half. And for that performance, she was the SEC Special Teams Player of the Week. Because everybody gets a trophy. But see, maybe it had nothing to do with, with leftists, because obviously leftists have invaded the world of sports. And they decided to give her a trophy for her ovaries. I mean, if we're being honest, right? I mean, it was really just her reproductive organs is the reason why she was awarded. It couldn't have been for her performance. It was simply because of her gender, and setting foot on the field with her gender is why she was awarded this high honor, right? You had all these guys. You had 12 kickers that played this weekend from the Southeastern Conference. All of them scored way more points than she did. Look, the next worst person, who was Cade York from LSU, he at least scored 1 point. She scored 0 points. So you had guys who scored between 1 point all the way up to 11 points. She scored 0 points, and she was the Special Teams Player of the Week. This is the world that we live in now, folks. This is what we with Unhyphenated America are always trying to point out and fight against. This is the path that the left is trying to take us down. And I got some other news that I learned today that, remember we're talking about sports, we're also going to talk about business. See, the Nasdaq, maybe some of you are familiar with it or not, it's the more tech-oriented stock market. You got the New York Stock Exchange, and there's also some other exchanges, but the New York Stock Exchange is the more well-known. Unless you know business itself and you know technology, you know that the Nasdaq is a more tech-oriented index, and they had decided to try to push something through to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. So I'm talking about the SEC, but it's a different SEC. It's not the Southeastern Conference for college football, but the SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is a government regulatory agency. So the Nasdaq has decided to try to put forward that in order for a company to be listed on the Nasdaq, they actually have to meet some identity politics goals. They're basically going to tell all these companies, in order to be, and I don't know what the number is, I could look it up, but I'll just tell you, all these companies that are currently listed on the Nasdaq, the idea that the left is saying is that the board of directors for these companies are too white and too male, right? There's too many white males on the board of directors for these Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 technical tech companies, right? That's what the left is telling you. Now, they're not sitting there going, there's too many qualified people. They're saying, no, there's too many people who happen to be white and male. Not taking into account the fact that, hey, maybe there's not enough people of other ethnicities who've decided to go that route. But here's the thing, this is affirmative action run amok. One of the things they're doing, I don't have to look over there, it said that the Nasdaq Stock Exchange is seeking U.S. authority to require more diversity in the boardrooms of Nasdaq listed companies, or to explain why they cannot. right? And they proposed this, they filed this proposal with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission on Tuesday. And if approved, it will require all companies listed on the exchange to publicly disclose consistent, transparent diversity statistics about their board of directors. It will require most Nasdaq listed companies to have or explain why they don't have at least 2 diverse directors. Now, check this out. Are you ready for this? When they say diverse, this includes having one board member who self-identifies as female and one who self-identifies as either an underrepresented minority or LGBTQRSTUVWXYZ. So foreign companies and smaller reporting companies would have additional flexibility in satisfying this requirement with 2 female directors. Oh, Lord Jesus, Lord, save us, right? Because, and it goes on to give this information. It says, according to the 2018 Board Diversity Census from the Alliance for Board Diversity and the consulting firm Deloitte, women held just 22% of Fortune 500 seats in 2018. Compared to 20% a year earlier and 16% in 2010. White men held 66% of Fortune 500 board seats in 2018. Blacks held nearly 9% of seats in 2018, compared with nearly 8% in 2010. This is all reported by USA Today. So, I mean, here's the thing. What percent of the population is LGBTQRSTUVWXYZ? I'm adding all the extra letters because they put LGBTQ plus, which means that they're allowing room to add as many additional letters. So why not just say LGBTQRSTUVWXYZ? When I was coming up, there was only 2 genders, right? And I'm a Christian constitutional conservative, and I'll tell you, I believe the Bible. That's what it says, is that God created man and woman. That's it. Now, I can get on, I'm sure people will sit there and go, oh, that's hate speech. Well, okay, listen, then please be the one to come out and say that the Bible is hate speech. Don't attack me. I'm telling you what the Bible says. The Bible says that God created man and woman. Now, I mean, if you're so bold, and who knows nowadays, who knows where we are in society, they might come out and say, well, yeah, the Bible is hate speech. They might have already said that, right? I'm just telling you where I'm coming from is that there is man and there is woman. But now that you're adding all these additional genders, I mean, why not just call it LGBTQRSTUVWXYZ since you're going to put a plus on there, right? Does that mean I hate people who identify in any particular way? No, don't be stupid. I'm not saying I hate people. I'm just sitting there going, I know that there's 2 genders. That's it, point blank, period. There's 2 genders. Now, here's the thing, though. Diversity has become this buzzword. Everybody's saying, oh, diversity matters. Well, actually, unity matters way more than diversity, right? Trying to sit there and say, well, we want a diverse workforce. No, I want a unified, functional workforce, right? I mean, nobody, see, what's supposed to matter when it comes to sports is the name on the front of the jersey more so than the name on the back of the jersey. That's what a lot of teams are starting to go towards, where they're saying, hey, I don't care what the color of your skin is. I don't care what your family background is. Number one, can you perform? And if you do perform, then you can come and play on our team and contribute to the team. So I don't care what you do in your bedroom, what 2 consenting adults do in the privacy of their bedroom. I don't really care. I mean, I have opinions, but at the end of the day, I don't really care what 2 consenting adults do in the privacy of their bedroom. I do have a problem with the idea that I'm supposed to take into account someone's sexual preference when I'm hiring, right? I mean, so I'm supposed to ask you, by the way, how do you like to have sex? Oh, great. You like to have sex in this particular way? You're hired because I need to meet this diversity quota and I need to hire someone who has sex in this particular way. How about you just come to the table and say, here's what I have done in my career. Here's how I have performed. And we can sit there and say, well, you're qualified. And if you're qualified, we'll hire you. And see, this is the problem. People act as if, like, when they talk about these companies, they're acting like these companies are especially not hiring people because they're a female, or they're not hiring this person because they identify as some other gender, or they're not hiring this person because of the way they like to have sex. That's what this whole movement is trying to convince you. And it's just not true. I could go on and talk about this, but here's some things. Are you going to get hired to be the kicker if you can't kick? Or should we just bring on somebody who can't kick because they happen to, meet some quota? Now, see, going back to Sarah Fuller from Vanderbilt University, she obviously knows how to kick a soccer ball because, by the way, Sarah Fuller just came off of being the goalie for Vanderbilt University's Southeastern Conference championship winning soccer team. So she's an athlete, that's undeniable. And she helped the team to win a conference championship in a pretty powerful conference. So she knows how to kick a soccer ball. But does she know how to kick a football? I mean, you would think that a kick is a kick, right? But then that's like saying, well, if you know how to swing a baseball bat, you should know how to swing a golf club. But it's not the same. It's swinging some object, but it's not the same, right? I mean, if you know how to throw a football, you should be a great pitcher. But everybody who's a great quarterback is not a great baseball pitcher. Just because you know how to, swing a golf club doesn't mean that you know how to swing a tennis racket. It's not the exact same thing. And I submit to you that the main reason, even though the head coach, Derek Mason, who just got fired, by the way, going back to performance matters, the now former head coach of Vanderbilt University, he was like me. He was born with a permanent tan. He had this melanin, this tan that just doesn't come off. And guess what? Like me, he probably doesn't want his permanent tan to come off. I kind of like my melanin. It helps out a lot in the summertime, right? But you know why Derek Mason was fired? He was fired because his team's been mediocre under the several seasons he's been the head coach. And this season, prior to this game, they were 0-7. So they fired him because of his performance. So even though Sarah Fuller got the nod for being the SEC Special Teams Player of the Week, the head coach still got fired because of the performance of his team. And by the way, once again, the head coach was a Black man. Nobody's raising a fuss over the fact that a Black man got fired. You know why? Because he was a coach who got fired for lack of performance. That's what should matter the most. It should be your performance. When you're in the game, whether it's the game of coaching, whether it's the game of playing a sport, or whether it's business, you should perform. And so when we look at business and we look at what the Nasdaq is trying to do, trying to push and say that in order to be listed on the Nasdaq, that a company has to show that it has this diverse workforce, that it's saying that you have to have 2 board members, right? One of them has to at least self-identify. Now, let's just touch on that for a second. What does it mean to self-identify as female? I mean, listen, this could be called hate speech, but, when I came out the womb, the doctor looked between my legs and said, yep, that's a male. And when you came out the womb, the doctor looked between your legs and said, that's either a male or a female. I think it's hilarious that now they're doing these big gender reveal parties, right? Where people are like having these explosions of blue or explosions of pink, because now it's huge. I mean, they didn't have a gender reveal party when my parents found out they were pregnant with me. Granted, back then way back in the dinosaur ages, we didn't have the ultrasound and stuff like that to be able to turn to tell. You pretty much just had to wait till the baby came out of the womb, butt naked, upside down, and screaming to say, oh, yes, you just had a boy or you just had a girl. But now, of course, with technology, we can look and see, and we're still looking and seeing and say, sir, ma'am, you're having a boy or a girl or multiple boys or multiple girls or a combination of boys and girls because you're having twins or triplets or beyond. But nobody uses that technology to say, congratulations, sir or ma'am, you're having a LGBTQI, QRSTUV, WXYZ. Nobody says that because that's kind of stupid. You know, but I just have to laugh. I really have to laugh to keep from crying about the direction that society as a whole is moving. To sit there and tell you that Sarah Fuller did a little measly squib kick, one kick, not even for points, just one kick that went bloop, 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 bloop down the field. And the other 11 kickers in the Southeastern Conference in college football all scored way more points, because if you have 0 and somebody else scores 1, that's still like 100%, 1,000% more points than what you scored. All the 11 other kickers scored way more points than she scored, and none of them were given serious consideration to be the SEC Special Teams Player of the Week, because none of them came out of the womb with ovaries. And in today's society, it's more important what your identity is than it is to actually perform. That's why the Nasdaq is sitting there saying, oh, well, you need to make sure if you're going to be listed with us, you need to make sure that you have somebody who self-identifies. Now, hold on. Let's think about this for a second. If you specifically said that the person has to self-identify as a woman, who is to stop all these companies from going to one of their boards of board members and saying, hey, you, Bob, from here on out, you're going to self-identify as a female? Do you understand that? You understand? You got to think. You got to stop and think. All it takes to supersede, to get around this ridiculous notion, is just to tell any one of your board members to self-identify, or more specifically, any one of your white male board members to self-identify as a female. And then you can take another one of your white male board members and say to them, hey, Sam, you are now a Black woman. I'm sorry. As they would say it, an African-American woman, right? I mean, why not? Why not tell one of your board members to identify? Listen, Sean King identifies as a Black male. He is, what do we call him? We call him, Martin Luther Cream, right? Powder X, right? I mean, there's all kind of names to make fun of that moron, Sean King. But if Sean King can choose to identify as a Black male, if Rachel Dolezal can choose to identify as a African-American female, and even become the head of a local chapter of NAACP, in this world that we live in today, why can't a white male decide to say, hey, you know what? I want to keep my board position. So as far as the board is concerned, I am now a African-American female. Why can't somebody on the board say, look, as far as the board's concerned, I am now a, LGBTQRSTUVWXYZ male or female? Why not? But here's the question. How is that going to make that company perform any better? I mean, I haven't seen any particular stats, but I would love to see some stats to show that the growth rate of a company goes up exponentially or even significantly simply by having more diversity on the board of directors. I've yet to see that prove to be true. See, I'm a history buff, right? And I believe in performance. I believe in having qualified people. And obviously, like you can tell, I'm a Black man. I love being Black. I have no reason to not love being Black, despite what people might try to say about Black conservatives like myself. But here's the reality. The reason why Black people overall progressed for over 100 years is because we had to perform. And the perfect example is, or are, or were, the Tuskegee Airmen. You know, the Tuskegee Airmen were held to a far higher standard of performance than any other pilots during World War II. I always point back the fact that former president, I think he's was it President Bush, George Bush was what, POTUS 41 or whatever number he was. But former President George H.W. Bush has the distinction of being the youngest naval aviator in American military history. A distinction he will have forever, because now with naval aircraft costing $135 million, right? There's like zero chance of them turning over a fighter jet to a 19-year-old, right? You have to have a college degree and 2 to 3 years of training before they'll let you fly off of a carrier and $135 million aircraft. But yet George H.W. Bush became a fighter pilot or a dive bomber pilot basically less than a year out of high school, graduating from Phillips Academy, Andover, which is the #1 prep school in the country. It's a private boarding school up in Massachusetts. But look at the standard that they held Black pilots to. There were people who believed that these Black pilots could not perform and would not perform. Here's something that's crazy. They actually believed that these pilots would not and could not perform because they were physically deficient. This is hilarious when you stop and think about this. They believed at that time that Black pilots would not be able to see at night. The ridiculousness of that is just blows my mind, because you have to stop and think about this. Let's go back, 50 years, 100 years, or whatever the year difference between, like, the World War II and the Civil War, but it was 80 years. Go back 80 years when there were Blacks who were enslaved, who were running away for freedom. Just stop and think about this and ask this question. Do you think that those runaway slaves left in the middle of the day, or do they sneak away at night? And if they did sneak away at night, were they carrying like a big flashlight? There were no flashlights back then, so it had to be a torch, right? Were they carrying this big torch? You understand how far away, if it's the dead of night, do you know that you can see one light like from miles and miles? So what are the chances that Black people who were running away for freedom either did it during the daytime or did it at night while holding a torch? I'd say there's zero chance. So they ran away at night, which means they could see at night like everybody else can. See, that's that kind of ridiculousness where they're going out of their way to prevent other people from having opportunities. Because when you go and look in the Tuskegee Airmen, they were one of the most distinguished flying units in the history of World War II. Now, these men were held to a way higher standard. I always tell people that they were held to what I would call the Navy SEAL level of standard for being able to fly. Way higher standard than George H.W. Bush was held to. These men all had at least a master's degree. Every single one of them had multiple degrees before they were even allowed to go into the program. And if they made any mistakes, they were busted out of the program. So they had to be the best of the best in order to even get a chance to get in the airplane, in order to get a chance to go overseas, in order to get a chance to fight and possibly die for their country. See, they simply wanted equality of opportunity, and they were willing to perform when they got there. And how do they perform? They never lost any US bombers that they were escorting to enemy aircraft. Not one. They performed when they were given a chance. So here's my thing. If it comes to the SEC, the Nasdaq, and they say, hey, we want to encourage diversity. We want to see more women on the boards of these different companies. I'm cool with that, as long as they're qualified women. I mean, if the woman can pass muster, right? If she can do the job, why not have a qualified woman on your board? And I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that these companies, because they ultimately have a profit motive, they're going to choose to bring on the most qualified people. And if that qualified person happens to be a woman, cool. If she helps to improve the bottom line of that company, which means that shareholders are seeing a higher return on their investment, cool. If that person happens to be a woman of color and her performance on the board helps to improve the bottom line, which means that the shareholders see an increase in the value of their stock, cool. If that person happens to prefer to have sex with other adults in a somewhat unusual way, if they're doing it in the privacy of their own home, but on the job as a board director, they help to improve the bottom line, which helps to increase profits, and the shareholders see an increase in the value of their shares, cool. But it's ridiculous to say, I'm going to force you to take someone for no other reason than how they self-identify. That's ridiculous. And you know what? It was ridiculous back to the Tuskegee Airmen to assume that Black people couldn't fly because there were Black people flying airplanes prior to World War II. There were Black people who were great warriors for this country prior to World War II. So the ridiculous idea that a Black person couldn't be a competent pilot was just foolishness. But, we go back to Sarah Fuller. We know she can kick a soccer ball. But, here's the reality. Men, males, biological males are bigger, stronger, and faster than biological females. That's an undeniable fact. And, here's a question I have. Who kicked off the ball before? Oh, that's right. They didn't have a ball kicked off before, right? So supposedly what happened was that Vanderbilt's whole team had been ravaged by COVID. But you're going to try to convince me that there was not a single other member of Vanderbilt's football team who could possibly kick the ball. Is that what you're telling me? Or did Derek Mason pull a stunt? Did he figure, hey, I'm going to try to, maybe he figured he was going to save his job. They were 0-7. He figured, hey, maybe the university, which by the way, the athletic director for Vanderbilt University is a Black female. I don't know, maybe he thought by bringing in a female to be the first kicker that might help save his job for another week or so. Obviously he didn't, because he got fired the next day. You know why? Because performance matters. Or at least it's supposed to matter. Sarah Fuller did not perform. It was a terrible kick. And it was a dishonor to her and to the game of football and to the other 11 kickers who all scored points when she scored 0 points, to name her as the SEC Special Teams Player of the Week. This is where we are with the everybody gets a trophy generation. This is where we are. And I'm 47 years old. And I never thought, listen, there were sports that I sucked at. My parents put me in every sport known to mankind. I tried it and I sucked at a lot of them. And you know what? I have 0 trophies or ribbons to show for my participation in it. I would actually be mad if you gave me an honor for simply setting foot on the playing field, especially if you said, well, Chris, we're going to give you this honor because one, you set foot on field, and two, you're Black. That's, oh my God, that is so disrespectful. No person with a shred of decency, no person with a shred of self-respect should ever accept some sort of award simply for existing, which is why former President Barack Obama accepted the Nobel Peace Prize for being an African American and being president of the United States, even though he then went on to bomb more countries than any of the previous presidents. But, they gave him that prize because of his existence as an African American person holding the office of president of the United States. So you know what? The foolishness keeps marching on. That's where we are. But you know what? Unhyphenated America exists to fight against identity politics, to show how America's best when it's unhyphenated, to show how we progress when we tend to focus on simple performance, when we focus on the things that unite us rather than the things that divide us. But the things that divide us, we have to point them out and we have to say that's wrong. And I'm here to tell you, in closing, it was 100% wrong for Sarah Fuller to be given that award as the SEC Special Teams Player of the Week. And the Nasdaq is 100% wrong for trying to force all these companies to have somebody on their board simply because they self-identify as either a female or self-identify as a member of the LGBTQRSTUVWXYZ class. It's not the right direction, America. How about we just focus on the content of our character? How about we just focus on performance? And we can all unite behind that. I'm Christopher Harris. This has been an Unhyphenated America Thought. Take care. God bless.